While we wait for William Buster, let me just add my thanks to all of you for being here today. My name is Dr. Deborah Joy Perez, and I'm the Vice President for Research and Evaluation and Learning at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. Many of you know about the Annie E. Casey Foundation, perhaps because you've heard us on NPR. Other you might know us because of the work that we do in systems reform on juvenile justice and child welfare. I want to extend my thanks to the Kauffman Foundation for hosting, to the City of Kansas City, Missouri for inspiring this conversation, to the Mayor, Sly James, and to the Public Health Department and other allies who helped put this together. But I want to extend a special thanks to Nelson Gabriel for Aim for Peace for all he did for putting this together. You know, today's conversation is an important conversation for many reasons, but it's important among those reasons because it takes courage. This is a courageous conversation, and it doesn't happen every day. So I want everyone in the room to kind of take a moment and acknowledge what's happening here, this moment, right? This is a moment, this one moment right now where change can happen. It starts here. It doesn't end here. It's not about this meeting. It's about this movement. It's about moving forward. It's about what are you going to do different when you leave these walls and in your work and how you work. We're here to tell a little story about what the role of philanthropy has been in this effort. I was privileged to be a part of a work group that we called ourselves the F11 because there were 11 funders working with the Obama administration's My Brother's Keeper campaign. And in those 90 days, we had worked very hard to be able to come up with some recommendations of programs and policies that we knew worked. There were 11 funders around the table, and of those funders, another 40 or so that formed part of what was called the Executives Alliance for Boys and Men of Color. I want to echo back to one of our early speakers who cited President Obama to say, if you work hard and you play by the rules, then you can make it. But sadly, in this country, the rules change depending on what you look like. And working hard, sometimes it's hardly working. And playing by the rules and making it doesn't happen for everyone. And sometimes it doesn't happen because opportunity is not presented, right? Not ability. It's not about achievement, it's about opportunity. So this conversation is really about philanthropy's role and what we've been able to do or are doing to address the issue of impact on boys and men of color. In my own reflections, I want to, I'm thinking about the youth panel, and I'm thinking about Odell and his experience and the courage it takes to be where he is today. I'm thinking about Scott, he's a young, the promise of Native peoples. I can't even imagine what it must be like to watch two people fighting over your land. Right? That's the power that we need to recognize that exists in Native populations. Or to Luis's experience and Tony's experience, what it's like to be the child of immigrants who don't speak English, for whom you're the interpreter when you're 6 years old, right? So those are the experiences that we need to bring in this room to figure out how do we find a path towards addressing these issues. So I'm going to give each of our panelists about 2 minutes to describe the work that they do, what they're doing now, their role in philanthropy, and how their particular role has contributed to the conversation of boys and men of color in this country. So I'll start with Andres.
Thank you. Andres Dominguez, Program Officer with the Healthcare Foundation of Greater Kansas City. The stories, the messages that you heard this morning, powerful. As a program officer, I seek to listen and understand And I get the opportunity to work in my backyard. I'm a product of Kansas City's system, institutions, a product of public school systems and colleges in our area. And as I look at the slide, state of the field, and how does our foundation invest in this, I like to think that all of our grant work affects men of color, affects the boys, as someone asked earlier, it affects the sisters as well. And through our 10-year history of grant making, we're a relatively young foundation, but I think we're a very innovative foundation. We got the name healthcare in front. But we take a look at our community and say, what else is happening that has a direct impact upon families? So we have 3 strategies. Safety net, which addresses the very core issues of how do we provide health coverage for all. Healthy communities. We can't have this conversation this morning without talking about safe places, without talking about the opportunities for families to exercise, to feel safe in their neighborhoods. And finally, mental health. We all know what happened yesterday with Robin Williams. We all are following what's happening in Ferguson, Missouri. We know what happens in this community when somebody is shot. And we know what role mental health plays in that. But the sad reality, as many of you have asked, where's the funding? Mental health, those of you who are providing mental health, those of you who have family members who are dealing with mental health issues are well aware that system support for the very issue of mental health is not where it should be. And it's a real concern of ours at the Healthcare Foundation because mental health and how it affects families is core to who we are. And you can't have this conversation that we're having today without discussing the issue of race. And what is the historic racism that exists in community that oftentimes when somebody is murdered at 64127, somebody who lives at 64152 doesn't even blink? And so what is that divide emotionally that we can disconnect ourselves from a murder that happens in this very city? And that's the challenge before us. And as a program officer at the Healthcare Foundation, we strive to listen and we strive to be a part of this community.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Susan Wilson. I'm Vice Chair of the Prime Health Foundation, which is a foundation that focuses on improving the health of the community through innovative programs, initiatives, and we focus on 3 areas. One is prevention, because we know that many of the problems we have, if we really look back, if we'd have done the right thing at the right time, could have prevented it. We also focus on some of the social determinants of health that impact wellness, mortality, and morbidity. And lastly, we look at issues of accessibility because we know that in our communities there are still wide disparities in access to health care, exposure to violence and other ills that impact health. I'm also in a unique position because I'm a clinical psychologist by trade and I'm Vice Chancellor of Diversity and Inclusion for UMKC. And as I think about the work that our foundation and philanthropy could do and should do, yes, dollars are scarce, but I think what more and more the Prime Health Foundation, as we've looked at social determinants of health, have started to ask the question that I challenge my other partners in philanthropy to do, and look at the unmet needs of very, very underserved and overlooked populations. And young men of color have been a population that I think, in many instances, philanthropy has stayed away from. Why? Because they're not the low-hanging fruit. They're a difficult population to approach. They're the forgotten. They're the guys with the hoodies on the street that we'd rather walk past rather than to talk to them, as I did when I held some listening sessions some years ago. And the stories that you hear would make you cry in terms of a school system that was not providing what was needed, in terms of parents that may not be there, not because they didn't want to, but they're working 2 minimum wage jobs just to afford an apartment. So I think we have to do a better job, and that's why I'm so excited today about looking at men of color, because that's the foundation. If we're going to rebuild families and communities, that's the foundation. We have to have young men that are working. I think one thing that we can do in philanthropy is really, yes, the government doesn't have much money, but sometimes government needs to look at how do they pool funding with other government agencies and work with philanthropy so we can have a broader impact. I think public-private partnerships, how do we get universities such as mine, junior colleges, our not-for-profits, and our corporations to say, we've got a problem, because we've got young men who are 17 to 25 who have no hope of ever having gainful employment and a career, and which is what starts the problems in our community. When you have no hope to join the American dream, then your dream turns into a nightmare. How do we come together and begin to pool our resources and our ideas with corporations, with education, with philanthropy? So I'll stop there.
Good morning still. I'm Stacy Daniels Young. I'm with Jackson County Combat. I'm also a proud member of this community, lifelong, a graduate of Paseo High School, went to MU, Columbia, MIZ. Thank you. A couple of people from Mizzou in the room. But the fund I represent, Jackson County Combat, is a little bit different from all the other funds up here because it is a government fund. It's a local government fund, and it is dependent on sales taxes in Jackson County, so it's countywide. So the good news is that it generates about $20 million a year, but being a government fund, it is stretched about 10 different ways. So the ways that most of the people in this room would be interested in that Combat does address the issues that we're talking about today are through our substance abuse and our newer violence initiatives. But unfortunately, just listen to that, substance abuse and violence. It sounds like it has to be something bad instead of something that lifts you up, right? So it sounds like you're waiting until something bad has happened. So what we really try to work on is get you in the room to think of how can you prevent these things. But as Dr. Wilson brought to our attention, a lot of times people want to go for the easier populations to reach. So they want to reach people in a school versus the people that are really, really, really at risk, maybe have been in trouble, maybe are right there on the cusp for getting in trouble, that need somebody positive to work with them. So I really want to challenge you to think, how can I go about serving that group? I will tell you, we get very few people who take that on, who take that harder, at really, really at-risk population who's maybe been in trouble. We have very few people who will take that on and say, that's who I want to serve. And I think it is because how am I going to gather them together? How am I going to engage them? As Joe said earlier, Joe McHale, think about it. He said he started off with 32 young people that kind of fit that population. And what'd you graduate? About 2/3 of them, which was a great accomplishment. But just to imagine the kind of work he had to do. So it is a challenge. Everybody, I always say when we get an application, everybody wants to do good. There's nobody who wants to go out there and just take the money and, well, maybe I've seen that a couple times, maybe once or twice. But most people really are in this work because they want to do good. So let's take it beyond doing good and doing gooder. Let's do gooder. Let's go for the people who nobody else is trying to reach because they're not easy, and you might get discouraged a little bit, but it's not our job to be serving people to have fun. It's our job to think about the people that we're supposed to be trying to serve.
Good afternoon. My name is William Buster with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. I'm director of our programming in Mississippi, New Orleans, and Deborah Joy spoke about our work with the White House over my brother's keeper in the 90 days, and I was the lead point person for the Kellogg Foundation, and we brought a full staff of about 11, 12 people into that process. And so I've been at this work, working in communities for over 20 years. And a part of that work I did specifically was with young males of color in North Carolina, and then moved on into philanthropy about 15 years ago. So I told you I'm from down south, so I'm from North Carolina, so I like telling stories. And I'll tell you a real quick story that I think speaks specifically to what is at stake and what is the problem with the work that we're trying to do. So let's say you're a fish farmer, and you've done all the work that you can do to get your eggs ready to spawn. You have them in their little hatcheries, and you work with them, and you give them the nutrients that they need, and now you have little fish. And your ultimate goal is to put those fish so they can multiply and have and be healthier fish. So you take all that fish, you take all the work that you've done as that farmer, that fish farmer, and you take your fish to the river, and you dump them in a river that's full of toxic chemicals. That is what we expect our children to do. We expect them to thrive in systems that are absolutely broken, and then we hold them accountable for not being well. The work that the Kellogg Foundation does, thank you, it comes out of a work that we've been doing for over 20 plus years. It started with diversity and inclusion, when that was the conversation to have. And then it led to becoming more intentional about having more voices at the table, because there was always this sense of and a fear of saying the word that many of us knew about, but were afraid. But then our board several years ago took the stance and said, you know what, the issue at stake, the issue really working in this country is the issue of racism. And so they said that if we become the best anti-racist organization that we can and support the conversation around healing racism, because racism is a sickness, then we can do our children proud. And so we've taken that approach of being a healer of racism and supporting the work happening in local communities around healing racism, and we've turned that work over and specifically working with populations, supporting work, working with young males of color. So real quick, the numbers for us over the past 20 years, when we funded the first landmark report, Repairing the Breach by Dr. Bobby Austin. Since that time, 1994, the Kellogg Foundation has funded about 860 bodies of work, both big and small, to the tune of well over $200 million in this area specifically focused on young males of color. We'll be having a report that comes out that kind of lays out the groundwork that we've laid over the past 20 years. So we're not going anywhere. This is the work that we're going to continue to do. One of the things that I would also add about the work that I find that is most successful in all the years that I've been supporting work in philanthropy is when you really, there's two things that I find most successful. One, supporting work that brings organizations together to work on specific issues, giving them the space. A mentor of mine called philanthropy the passing gear. So philanthropy can create the space that has organizations to kind of come together and work together. Nobody funds a table for people to sit and talk. That's sometimes the best place. That's where the work really happens. So creating a space, a safe space for organizations to work together, that's something that philanthropy can do that a lot of other organizations can't do. Another thing that I think is important is very action-oriented. We're coming off of a work this summer where we supported summer jobs. And now the reports are coming in. We, across the nation, we've supported a total of about 1,000 jobs for young people. And our hopes is that we're trying to get federal government and state governments to get back into that work of supporting summer jobs. There's nothing better for a young person to have in the summer than money in their pockets. And so I just came from Sunflower County, Mississippi. Y'all may not know about it, but Sunflower County, Mississippi is a PO. That's how we say it down south. And we had 50 businesses come together with the Kellogg Foundation money and employed 75 young men for the summer. And that is powerful. In a county that's only 3,000 people, 75 young men having jobs is very powerful. So funding action-oriented work is powerful as well. So I'll stop and answer any questions.
So I want to turn the conversation a little to the broader campaign around changing the narrative. And so part of the issue around boys and men of color is we're always hearing the negative statistics and nothing about the assets that boys and young men of color bring to community. And so can you address the issue of how your foundation is going about changing the narrative, changing the story about young men of color as threatening, as to be feared, et cetera. And I heard in prior conversations in the panel, it's trying to, the truth is that you can reduce incarceration, you could reduce detention and still maintain public safety, but yet we have a recent study from Stanford University that showed that the more we talk about racial disparities in incarceration, the increase in the acceptance of punitive of policies. So and that's really startling. So the idea that we need to do something about changing the narrative around young men of color. So maybe I'll start with you going the other way, William, on changing the narrative.
The issue of what I call the true narrative, another story. So I have a nephew, young man, 25 years old, 6'7", dreads down his back, works every single day for his kids. He's married with 2 children, and works for a trucking company. And he likes guns. And he loves his mother and his grandmother. And this is a young man that, if you were to see him, he's the epitome of what they call the boogeyman. How can we support the work around helping people understand, even within our own communities, because that's where we have to start, within the communities of color, where they have accepted part of this narrative, that these young men are of no use and of no support to their community. So changing the narrative is truly about helping young people themselves exhibit the voice that they have. There's no more powerful work than I've seen than some work that's happening in places like Oakland with the Youth Radio Network and other places where young people are taking to their airways, taking to social media to tell their own story, helping people understand who they truly are and the genius that they hold. I think that's one piece. I think the other 2 things, I always look at education in the justice system as it comes to children. There's some great work happening around the country where police departments are working internally to help their own officers understand the narrative that they may not even understand they hold around young males of color. That's the work that has to happen. Or working with teachers. When they stand in front of a classroom and they see a little boy that's 5 years old, and something in their mind helps them believe that it's the best place for that little boy is to be out of my classroom because he's threatening to me. I've heard these words used when talked about a 5-year-old. He's threatening, he's menacing. A 5-year-old. We have to work with teachers and educators to understand the narrative that they change. So you give young people the voice, and then you work with those systems that actually hold this negative narrative and help them understand how they change their own understanding. Not holding blame, not trying to blame anybody, because the narratives that we hold, we swim in this stuff. It's everywhere. So you can't blame a person that comes to work and says, when they've been bombarded with the reality in their minds that young people are threatening. There are ways in which you can deal with implicit bias by helping and holding people up and helping them understand how they carry those biases, and then help them become a part of solving the narrative issue.
You know, the pendulum has swung the past 10, 15 years to be much more outcome-based. I'm sure everybody in the room who's run a program has heard that. And as a former evaluator, I'm happy to hear that, but with it comes, a focus on evidence-based programs. And what we often hear from those of you wanting to do something innovative is, well, maybe it hasn't been tested. So one thing we're trying to look at is how can you help those programs with a germ of a good idea link on to something that take advantage of something that's been evaluated or researched and try to give it some time to grow, to nurture and grow, and to be patient, we have that since we're a government fund, we can only spend money 1 year at a time. But we recognize that the harder the work that you're attempting to do, I mean, if you're stepping out there saying, I'm going to try something that's different and it's hard, it's going to take you a little bit longer. You're going to have some missteps. So I think one thing that we've started doing is trying to have that patience and to try to encourage those smaller projects, those new ideas, and kind of, whether it's to link them with somebody else who has a good idea, or to just hold their hand and give them a chance to take on the harder problems that a lot of people in society don't want to take on.
Well, I will be honest and say that the Prime Health Foundation is just at the cusp of beginning to work on some of these issues, and I think that may be true of other foundations as well. I think there's a number of roles that we have to play in changing the narrative. One certainly is, as funders, raising the collective unconscious and conscious of the community through white papers, other information dissemination, that this is a problem worthy of consideration, of focus, and something that's really critical in our community, because again, I think the big problem with men and boys of color is marginalization, that it's not viewed as important as access to health, as important as some other issues that foundations deal with. And when you look at the statistics of African American women, 32% of them never have been married, and one researcher said they have a better chance of being struck by lightning than being married. What does that speak to? That speaks to the lack of development of our young black men, educational and economic opportunities so that they can be husbands and fathers, not that they don't want to be. And so I think changing the narrative is calling attention to some of those issues, and also being attached somewhat to NPR myself, working with the local media to begin to tell these stories, not just the stories of murder and mayhem, but the positive stories about black young men in our communities that are making a difference and the programs that help them.
Changing the narrative is always going to be very difficult in a community that just thrives on the kinds of messaging that gets out there, especially when it deals with people of color. Again, it comes back to some of the core issues of what gets people excited in this town and what gets people complacent in this town. And when you look at philanthropy, what's the opportunities for philanthropy to intervene? And there's all kinds of intersections for them. And I bring that up because I'm right now looking at a couple of young men who sat in this very room a few years ago, Randy and Jermaine. Put your hands up. They were young men here who served on a youth advisory board in which young people were given an opportunity to act as leaders when they were in high school. And I run into them all over the place now, just like I run into Project Choice students who, when you think about changing the narrative, when people would ask me back when I did Project Choice, people said, how successful was the program? This is back in the early 90s. And I can reflect on an individual who went on to junior college who did a semester. And people would have considered that failure because he only did one semester. He graduated from high school, which was the goal of the program, but he only did one semester. And I used to tell people, ask me in 15, 20 years when that young man is a father. And let's take a look at what his children are doing. Happy to tell you that that young man's daughter is going to MU Columbia this fall. He didn't go to college, he just did that one semester. I don't even think he completed that semester. So he's changing the narrative for his own family. And so oftentimes families can change their own narrative. And that's where it's essential, is that we as individuals and we as community can change the messaging that is out there. And oftentimes we fail to do that. We don't celebrate our own at times. We do that to ourselves. We tend to focus on the negative because sometimes that's so much easier to share those stories. And we fail to share the success stories of what a Randy and what a Jermaine have done to this community. And oftentimes when people say, well, how do we fund that kind of programming? And what are the finite resources that exist? And that has already come up. And I stop and I think about, we had an opportunity here through the Missouri state tobacco tax, and it failed by a few percentage points. And at the Healthcare Foundation, we're looking at that again to say, how can the tobacco sales tax in Missouri impact the very things we're talking about today? And most recently, I had the opportunity to speak at UMKC, and Mayor, one of your staff people was in my class, and they asked me, what do you know about social impact bonds? And I was dumbfounded because I'd never heard of a social impact bond. And when you think about changing the narrative around funding, let's take a look at what a social impact bond can do. There are very small examples of them right now in this country. But it's an innovative tool that will allow us to do the kinds of things that we want to do as funders, that allow us to do the kinds of things that you want to do as nonprofits, as community partners. Because when you think about a social impact bond, if we're able to demonstrate that we can prevent one murder in this city, what is the cost savings emotionally, spiritually, economically to our community? What is the cost savings to government if one person is not murdered? What if we cut the 100 plus murders in half? What is the cost to the state of Missouri? And what if this whole nation was willing to galvanize itself and say, you know, we're done with this murder thing. We're done with the kind of crime and violence. We consider ourselves as a nation, as a community, to be such a thriving place. And yet, we can't address this very issue of why we shoot each other. And we get alarmed when a suburban school gets shot, but it doesn't cause the same alarm when the school just across the street may have somebody shot outside the building, and that's cause for alarm. And as someone who works in philanthropy, it's a very difficult question for us to answer because of the tremendous need that exists, and always with finite resources, trying to do what's best for our community. Now, I like to think as a foundation, we're kind of unique because we have a great opportunity coming up in October. It's called a community conversation. Changing the narrative, we're going to invite core constituent consumers who are end users of our largesse to say, this is the challenge that exists right now in Kansas City for me as it relates to my health. And if it's murder, if it's blight, if it's housing, if it's education, if it's transportation, we want to hear that message.
So I want to take it up a level from the individual and the program level to the systems level. Because as good as a program can be, bad systems trump good programs every day, right? So if you're in a juvenile justice program and someone gets detained because of a technicality, which often happens, how do we change systems at the higher level so you're not working one child at a time, but you're working with thousands of children potentially and avoiding detention and avoiding incarceration? So let's talk about systems reform.
One thing we latched onto on a systems level, since combat does work strongly in the criminal justice system as well as treatment and prevention, as we got more into violence, we learned about, trauma-informed care and trying to apply that from the treatment world, getting prevention people and others just to learn about it. And I know of school systems, the whole school system has done that training. And the power in that is that they're looking at, I had a principal tell me, it used to be, kid cussed me out, I'm like, you're suspended. Now, I'm looking at him like, what happened to you today? That's not normal for a kid to behave this way. So just understanding the role of trauma and getting people in the criminal justice system to do that has been so powerful. And it's just, they've helped to spread it, to say, we need to get our whole staff to learn this so that we can respond appropriately and be helpful. Again, I always take it back, and somebody earlier said this, I don't know if it was the mayor or somebody else said, let's think about the person we're supposed to be serving. You called it the end user. Not what's easy for the system, but to help that one end user, that one client to grow. And the trauma training has been very powerful. If your agency hasn't been exposed to it, Combat's going to sponsor another one in November that's going to be focused on people like prevention and not clinicians, so that you can see how just looking at the people that you're working and understanding their world, not to, as the police called it, I think I heard you guys call it hug a thug. It's not about hugging a thug. It's about understanding the role of trauma and how that can impair the things that you want to accomplish.
I would piggyback what Stacy said. You know, as a psychologist, when you look at some of the issues that our communities face, trauma is at the root of a lot of violence, a lot of negative lifestyles, because when people don't get treatment for horrible traumas that they face, it reflects other things. A couple of other things with systems. I think we're getting better at recognizing that in schools, the answer isn't when a child has behavioral problems to put them out of school, because if you look at the statistics, out-of-school suspension is a pathway to juvenile justice and then prison. And so how do we begin to inform those school systems around alternatives to dealing with problem behaviors, which often are untreated or undiagnosed mental health issues that have answers and treatment for, or at the very least, strategies that can break that chain early on. I think there's also some promising work. People are recognizing that the war on drugs failed. It created a prison industrial complex with a lot of black males and Latino males who are now on the verge of coming out with no skills and no hope. It's good to focus on K through 12, but what about our men 18 to 30 who are coming out of these systems? We need a system response that is really going to involve a multidisciplinary approach that has to do with jobs, mental health, and a host of other things that, again, this whole idea of collaboration and pooling resources can help inform.
So, William, I want to ask you to address the question on systems, on racial healing. Can you talk about how do you do racial healing and address racism from a systems perspective?
If I had the answer to that, I don't think America would be the problem that it is today. But I think one of the things that we focus on is collective action, collective input. And when we've seen systems change around the issue of healing racism, it has multiple layers. It has multiple entry points for people to kind of get engaged. I'll give you an example of some work that's taking place right now in New Orleans, where the mayor's office said New Orleans is one of the oldest cities in this country, and in 2018 it'll be 300 years old. The mayor himself said, by 2018, I want us to have an identifiable pathway of healing racism in our community. Leadership is one of those key pieces of systems. Then you have folks who actually know where the systems are breaking down and having conversations at those tables. And so you fund the opportunity, or you work with individuals who have key leverage points within systems, within schools, within the juvenile justice system, who actually know where it actually breaks down. And giving them the power to kind of change how they are integrating. There's an issue, this issue of trauma all over this country. In New Orleans, we have children who literally walk to school and walk by bodies on their way to school. And having the opportunity to say that the health system, the healthcare system, the mental health system, the health department is being called by its leadership to work on issues related to trauma as it relates to the impact of racism as well. And so you deploy all of these resources, and then you get the people themselves who are impacted by the systems. Give them the voice to articulate clearly, support them in saying, this is where it is failing me. And instead of taking it as a criticism, taking it as an opportunity to learn how to improve the system. So you have leadership, you have the key leverage points within systems, and you have the people who are impacted by the systems working together. And that is something that I don't think another system in this country outside of philanthropy can actually support those types of entry points. And so I've seen it work in places that you wouldn't think healing racism would work. When multiple systems come together around common core issues to begin to work on healing racism. One quick, another point, in a community that I supported in South Carolina many years ago, there was an issue of access to water, a rural community. The black community wanted water infrastructure. The white community did not, because they thought that brought more businesses. And at the core, at the end of the day, it was about development, but people thought it was an issue of race. Really was an issue about community and having a common voice around community. So you find the ways in which you help people find what the resolution can be that everybody can agree to. Not everybody's gonna get what they want. But in a community that had been plagued by 300 years of the issue of race, they found a common ground around one particular issue, clean water for everyone. And they rallied themselves around that, and they had a viable option that limited development but brought clean water and sewer to everyone in that community. It's that kind of stuff. And I think another key piece around healing racism and systems is that it has to happen locally. I tell people all the time, the size of this room, everybody in this room, if you all committed to that conversation, when you come in, we gotta hear the date again about when we're coming together here in Kansas City to talk about these issues. This room can heal the city of whatever it is that ails it. All you need is 5 strong individuals, and we got over 200. It's an issue of will. It's not an issue of resources. Do you have the will at the end of the day? So healing racism, though complex, really does come down to leadership, leverage points, and those impacted by the systems working together.
So we're going to open up for questions. Before I do, I want to share a few insights from the work that we did on that, the Executive Alliance for Boys and Men of Color. There's this report called The Time to Action that you'll all get a copy of or a link to. I'll make sure to get it to Nelson Gabriel. 5 chief lessons from that work is that we must translate evaluation results into policy change. As again, you can't heal all of these issues just one program and one person at a time. You have to look at structural and contextual factors. Develop communication strategies to provide evaluation results to communities implementing those programs. Collect, track, and report gender and race-specific data. We reviewed over 40 plus interventions nationally and found very few of them actually collected race, gender specific data. So it's hard to say the impact of those programs specifically on boys and men of color as opposed to girls, or which groups of color certain programs work with. I want to mention here that the other challenge was the majority of the programs and interventions that were highlighted and identified were focused on African American. Very few programs on Native Americans, very few programs on Latinos, very few programs on Asian American boys. So there were gaps there even within boys and men of color. Include research and evaluation on what works. And as you learn, I mean, this is the idea of sharing what works with each other. Those of you in this room, if you have something that's working in a mentoring program, I saw 10 hands go up of folks who are running mentoring programs. What do you know about what's working and what's not working? And how do you kind of align your strategies so that those who do certain things well will do those things, and those that do other things well will do those. And then focus on systems and contextual barriers. So now let's open up for questions. We have a few minutes. Yeah, please.
Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
All right, my name is Lamond Warren. Don't belong to part of any organization as of yet. My question is, the world we live in, the societies that we deal with, a lot of it sounds good, but when we talk about racism, we deal with hate. I mean, this nation was built on it. It motivates it, it pushes us. When I look at social media, which I rarely do, if there is any positive move made by anybody that is non-white, the hate comes pouring, and it never stops. I mean, you can see posts that people made years ago, and people are still like, I can't believe, and I know there's a system of misinformation, disinformation, but how do we as a group, as a collective conscious, move forward? We've done this before. We've got the small people, we've done it with money, we've done it without money, but there are other influences that always find a way to disorganize what it is that we're trying to do. I'm just saying, how is it that we can bridge that gap? We see it in high government, we see it in our schools and education. We can't get away from it. I have 2 sons. My oldest son is, why are they talking about Mr. Obama every day? You know, Mr. Obama is the president's father. President Obama
Amen.
is the colored man that leads this nation, leads the so-called the leader of the free world, but every day it's Mr. Obama, So just on that small bit of what we get every day, can we really overcome this? I know the people in here, they have love. I'm loving everybody in here for being here to come out to try to bridge the gap, but every time we only get so far. We're tired. Some of us are tired of reaching for the ceiling. We're ready to reach for the stars and keep going.
So what advice would you give about how do you kind of speak truth to power? How do you change circumstances? I know that in Twitter there was a dialogue around how certain media covered the murder in Detroit and how they framed that the victim in that tweet. And so how do we overcome kind of those messages and just as a start to correct the false and the myths that exist? I often hear this quote, there are more black men in prison than in college. Have you all heard that? And that's absolutely false. That's absolutely false. And we need to call that out when we hear lies. Speak truth to those lies. So what advice do you have?
It's painful, and I hear what you're saying. I'm an immigrant to America, and I often hear people refer to immigrants in certain slanderous ways, and I'm like, well, if you're talking about immigrants, you're talking about me. And if you're talking about immigrants, you're probably talking about my children, even though they're born in America, because they look like me, and so therefore they get casted in a certain manner of stereotype and what have you. So what happens often is that we adults, it's almost like, forget it. Okay, with the adults. But what I hear is that the teenagers get it. Those 20-year-olds get it. They see the hate because they've experienced it from their parents, and they say enough is enough. And so oftentimes when I talk to different organizations, Stop Violence, which focuses a lot around on violence against gays and lesbians, they say, high school kids get that already. But yet adults don't get it. And oftentimes when it comes to racism, it's probably going to take another generation, but we're going to get there at some point. Just like I look at people when they make anti-immigrant comments, and I see them spit on them, like they did in California here about a month or two ago, and you look at what they did to the children in Little Rock, it's the same imaging. Only we're dealing with their grandchildren who are now expressing their hate. And so how do we deal with that?
So
and
do
you
you
look
have
at,
an answer on how
and
to
so
do, what can he
one
do?
of the solutions, you have professors like Uciel Pesina at UMKC who are changing the way teachers teach. That's a solution.
All right, other potential solutions or suggestions?
I think one of the issues, brother, that I think the piece that's most hardest for us to deal with is the fact that when you feel like you've done and you keep doing and you keep seeing this onslaught, you ask the question always, it's just a human reaction. Why? Why do I keep fighting? But I think therein lies the issue, and therein lies the opportunity to keep pressing. I always turn to people like mentors of mine, my grandmother, and people like Dr. King, who said that the most powerful thing you can do is love, and love in your family. Protect your family. Start with the smallest unit, which is a family, and a unit connects with another unit. 2 families, 3 families, it becomes a community. That is the most powerful thing that we can do, and we surround our children with those things. Because hate is always going to be with us, but it is how we refuse to give in to it. It may sound pie in the sky, but that's the only way in which I can approach it, because short of that, and I'm being completely honest, short of that, you have a brother like me who would want to go out into the streets with those brothers in Ferguson. I can't do that. That's not the example that I have to set for my son. I have to lead with love. And I have to lead with building upon relationships that are based upon love, because I ultimately believe there's more of us than it is of them.
Right.
It is only because we don't speak up that this mess continues to go on in our communities, in our states, in our city, in our country.
So, I'm sorry, sir, what was your name?
My name?
No.
Lamont Warren.
Lamont Warren. How many people would like Lamont to be one of their coaches or mentors and work with their organizations? Can you follow up with him, please? All right, yes.
Hello, my name is Pat Brown Dixon. I'm with the Small Business Administration, and I am an appointee of President Obama. And I just did not want to leave today without telling you some of the initiatives that the president has. 20-year-olds, are you here? Anybody up to 20-year-olds? Would you stand, please? 20s? Nobody in here
There are
under
a
20?
couple of overflow rooms in the other.
Well, anyway, I wanted to tell them it's not always about a job. Make your own job. And the Small Business Administration has the opportunity, and we have the resources to help you free. We're with the federal government. There are over 148 federal agencies in the Kansas City area. If you want to know what kind of services they have, USA.gov. Okay, the federal government may not have money for grants and funding and all of that, but we have resources such as financial literacy, active shooter training, which may be appropriate at some point, entrepreneurship, faith-based initiatives, health information, military. We even have used furniture and equipment for nonprofit organizations. And the president is also trying to encourage hiring of ex-offenders. So I just wanted to let you know, I am with the federal government, and the federal government is here to help you with our resources.
So go see her if you want some information about resources. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask the panel, are you aware of Trauma Matters KC? It's a task force. I'd love to invite anybody in the room that wants to be on the task force to meet with us the second Monday at Mark at 6th and Broadway from 2 to 3:30.
Thank you. A question over there.
Yes, I heard Stacy, who is a classmate of mine, mention that they have programs at Combat for people or organizations with that small idea to work with them, to do that hand-holding. And wanted to know if other groups or other philanthropies have that type of thing, because a lot of times the resources can be used if we do know how to connect with them, and if we can build that. I mean, I've talked with Henry, I've talked with Tyrone. I deal with technology. We try to bring that out to more people in the community. They want to work with us, but we've got to have that kind of, how do we grow that? And how do we work that?
And you're talking about probably technical assistance and, yeah, and grant writing. I think we did one on last year, making sure you're communicating your idea, not over-promising, you know, what you can do, not having somebody write the grant that has no idea of how it's going to actually be implemented. I think those are the kind of things you're talking about. And Andreas, you guys do a lot.
We provide grant writing support up to 8 hours for small organizations that have budgets of under $500,000. We also have worked with the Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership to work with a cohort of nonprofits who are trying to address basic issues of mission, guiding principles, and just their own sustainability.
And Prime Health has folks that you can work with if you have an idea to flesh your idea out and see if it's a fit for the kinds of things we fund and how to get from point A to point B.
As I elderize, I would like to say to the lady who gave the points of interest that is going to be published in your report, one of our severe shortcomings is that we have not learned to toot our horn as an organization. As a matter of fact, we get caught up in the badness, and we're almost afraid sometimes to say what it is that we're doing good because it seems so against the grain. However, I feel like that your organization and even the funders must take an aggressive approach to finding those people and help mentor them to be able to say that they are doing something good. This is not only an individual thing, this is an organization who represents the individuals, and they must do it ferociously.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think one of the challenges in being, I think just from I'll speak from my personal experience, is we tend to not let our own light shine. And as people of color, we are taught that there's, we shouldn't be conceited, we shouldn't be boastful, and I think that translates into when we do our work, that we don't often lift up and elevate. but there's nothing powerful about dimming your own light so that other people can feel powerful, right? So we have to stand in our own greatness, right? So we have like 8 minutes left for 1 or 2 more questions in the back. Yes, 1 and then 2, yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, my name is Dre Taylor. I'm with Males to Men Mentoring Group, and it seems that we have like an elephant in the room that nobody wants to speak about. It seems that nobody's talking about anybody profiting off the backs of our youth. It's a lot of people in here, there's foundations and research that I'm hearing about our young black men as if they're lab rats. You know, everybody's looking at what they're doing. Nobody's focusing on the cause or the disease. Everybody's focusing in on the symptoms. We see them acting up. We see them shooting, hanging on the plaza. But nobody's sitting here looking at the cause of what's going on. Nobody's looking at the disease. Who's profiting off the backs of our young youth?
Right.
From the probation and parole officers, from the people administrating drugs, from the private industrial prison
That's right.
complex. Once you get out the
That's right.
system, it's hard to get out.
That's
and
right.
so we got all these institutions that systematic racism that keeps us involved in there, but nobody wants to deal with the disease. We always want to look at the youth as if they're lab rats and say, how can we solve this? But nobody want to attack it up front. And that's the big, seem like it's a big elephant in the room
Right.
that nobody here wants to address.
Right, right. That's a really important point. Thank you. So a couple of, I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to comment, but there's, you know, it's pipeline to prison starts now at preschool. There, you know, kids in preschool being sent on suspension. Judges getting payment for every youth that they incarcerate. I mean, this is it's not gone unnoticed that this kind of system kind of corrodes society and progress. So and to kind of add to that, often some nonprofits are fighting over the same folks that they're working with instead of working together. So one person could be potentially involved in 10 different programs. So there's a lot of kind of that, those issues that have to be addressed. Does anyone want to add any insight to that?
Well, one thing that came to mind is that we've heard a lot today about urging people to collaborate, and what hit me is we usually want people to collaborate with us. So collaboration goes several ways, but again, you know, if you remember what the purpose is, but seek out how, collaboration can be as simple as seeing how somebody can be a dedicated either a referral source or a partner with you, but just looking at the pipeline that the person that you're trying to serve has to go through and making sure that you're smoothing it out as much as possible. It doesn't have to be that if I'm collaborating with somebody else, then my program is smaller. You know, look at it as a win-win, because I see when I hear, hear us talking about collaboration, some of us in the audience are kind of zoning out saying that's going to reduce me, but look at it as how it can make all of you stronger. And again, you know, I'm always going back to the person that you're supposed to be helping.
And the other piece is really never forgetting that if we're going to impact young black men, we have to talk to them, and not just the ones that are easy to talk to, the ones that are harder to reach, to really get a feel for what the problem is and make them a part of the solution and how we come up with solutions.
Yes, Andres, and then I want to take the last question.
Just, Reverend Flowers is going to get mentioned again. He was my mentor back in the 80s, and I visited with him briefly, and I said, same story, same problem, different leadership. Kansas City's got a lot of great leadership. As far as the issue that you raise about how do we change and how do we think about how Kansas City can be who we should be. A few years ago, we had something called, Is It Good for the Children? You know, maybe we need to revisit that and ask ourselves some critical questions about who we are as a community and raise that question again, maybe redefine it. But oftentimes what happens is that people in this room, and I know many of you, and I know many of you already work together, you know, Kansas City is a good place to be, and I really think that there's a lot of solutions within this community to address the core problems that we have, and that's, I think, really essential as to who we are as a community.
So last question in the back.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Is it afternoon? Mm-hmm. Yes. Crystal Watson with the Kansas Black Chamber of Commerce, President and CEO. So when I look at this from an economical standpoint, I'd like to ask the funders on stage, have we done any research in terms of how the black consumer spends their money. By 2017, $1.3 trillion will be spent by the black consumer. Of that, the young black Americans, African Americans, are part of the mainstream culture, where they are influencing our culture. So when we look at the saggy, baggy pants, where'd that come from, right? So it came from, we know, from institutions where kids are locked up, and we know what that means, but the saggy black pants, starting out with our young black males, that has created a culture of fashion. Now, it might not be on the positive side, but at the same time, young blacks are influencing culture and music and fashion and other areas. So when we look at opportunities to collaborate and how we be creative and think outside the box, are we doing any research to show on a positive side how young blacks are spending their money, how we can approach businesses to encourage them, that if we can help our youth and encourage them in an economical way in terms of entrepreneurism and starting a business or moving in the professional arena, how that impacts their business. Because we're spending our money and we need to understand, and our businesses need to understand how we spend that money. So is there any research to show that? Because that statistical information can be very beneficial, especially for some of the groups, nonprofits that are helping youth.
Great, thank you.
I will, there was, someone's already done that research, but philanthropy doesn't have to do it. The banking system has already done that research. Wall Street Journal, there was an article a few years ago, no, a couple of years ago, and then there was another article in the Times, New York Times, I think 2 weeks ago, that says the only growth sector as far as banking is with the low-income population. So the people who have money know where the money is now. There's no growth in middle and upper income. They've tapped all of that out. So somebody's figured out where the money is. The money is in low-income community, and that may sound counterintuitive, but people collectively do have spending power. Now, several ways in which I think we can help young people understand. There's lots of work that went out. You know, philanthropy has this bad issue of being faddish. But in the early 90s, I remember work that happened around youth entrepreneurship development. Very powerful work, but then went out of fad. We have to stick with the things that we know work. Teaching young people how to engage money, organize their money, is a very viable way to have that money stay in the community. Some of the most powerful work I've seen was young people working around how they pushed out of their communities. I don't mean to step anybody's toes in here. Check cashing joints in their neighborhoods. They don't have any business in our communities. That's a draw on our community. Young people know that. When you break it down to them that somebody's going to charge you 400% interest on getting $100, young people know how to do the math. And so I think working with young people around the value of money and the power that they have with their money, because everybody else has already recognized it, is a way in which we can help them gain some power and some leverage.
Right, so we're going to have to end our session. I'll just end with the 4 kind of audacious goals of the Executive Alliance and the Foundation Work Group. And one is that all boys and young men of color are healthy socially, emotionally, mentally, behaviorally, and physically. All boys and young men of color are taught in rigorous, effective, culturally relevant, engaging, and supporting school environments. All boys and young men of color graduate from high school and post-secondary education prepared for success in their careers. And boys and young men of color exposure to harm from juvenile and criminal justice is dramatically reduced. I think we have a lot of work ahead. I want to thank you for your time. Please join me in thanking the panel.
And please thank Dr. Pettis for leading the facilitation there, please. We have a couple of things we want to finish up with. We have the closing remarks from a couple of our youth. Miles Reed from Ruskin High School, Morgan Peterson from Hogan Prep Academy. And please be patient as we also have Dr. Jamila Thompson, who will lead us with some research initiative data collecting.
Hello, everybody. My name is Miles Reed. I currently attend Ruskin High School, and I am a 10th grader living in the South Kansas City area. And it really touches my heart to know that there's a group of people that actually care about what happens to young men of color, such as myself and my colleague. And first of all, I would really like to thank Aim for Peace for bringing us all together today. I would like to thank the mayor's office, and I would like to thank all the officials that attended here today. And just to let you know what you do matters. And well, before I deliver the rest of my time to my colleague, I'd like to leave y'all with this. Just remember that young men of color and men of every race, they always think that we have some type of limitation to us, to what we could think. They always say, think outside the box. To really come help us and get us interested, you gotta get us to understand that there is no box to think out of, that the sky is the limit. So, I just hope to see this again, and not just this community in Kansas City, but in communities everywhere, because if this keeps on happening right here, us coming together and finding the solutions to the problems, the world will be a better and safer place, because I really do want to walk up to my gas station every once in a while. So, thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Morgan Peterson. I'm a part of I'm 16 years old. I'm part of Higher Impact's Leaders of Tomorrow program. I attend Hogan Prep High School. I'm currently about to be a junior. I would like to attend the University of Missouri Columbia, majoring in business and studying law to become a lawyer. And I would like to thank you guys for coming out, because it shows that you truly do care, like my colleague said. But it's good that we came together, but we have to put it into action. Like, we can come together all you want to, but if you don't put into action what was said here today, it doesn't matter. Like, we missed school for nothing. Like, and I would just like to thank you guys for taking time out of your busy schedule to come out and make this event a success. I'd like to thank Obama's administration, President Obama's administration, and all the elected officials and non-elected officials, and thanks for just showing that you care.
With that, thank you. We want to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to say something and to provide contributions to this process. So with that, you oftentimes hear this is the part we can all play. Pastor Reverend Gabriel doesn't have any offering baskets coming out, but this is the part we can play. We want every table to contribute to, we know there's a wealth of resources in this room. We are missing, and to really do this more, we definitely would have a lot more young people, but with the wealth of resources that we do have, the workers, the Aim for Peace workers are distributing some little worksheets. And with that, every table, we want you to begin to collaborate and think multi-sector. We're sitting, a lot of us, with different sectors that we don't always engage with. But to kind of close this, if we know that the vision is to ensure that all people, particularly boys and young men of color, reach their full potential, if that's the vision, and based upon the initiative with the My Brother's Keeper, there have been some goals and some problem areas that we need to address. If your table had the opportunity to make a recommendation, which is what you're going to do, we'll compile this information and make sure that it's all fed back. But if your table was working as a collaborative, so let's practice what we've been talking about a little bit, and were to make a recommendation regarding the problem areas that your table will get, so there are 6 problem areas, your table may get 1 or 2 of those in 5 minutes, called rapid assessment, to really explore through what we call root cause analysis. Someone over here said, are we getting to the root causes? One way of doing that is to go backwards. So when this table comes, when the sheet comes around, if someone from your table could serve as a note taker or recorder, first thing you'll do is just write down the names of everyone at your table. That's on one side or one of your sheets of paper. And the second thing you're going to do is for your problem, and this will take us 5 minutes and we'll all be out together. For the problem that you have, all you're going to ask, somebody at your table just needs to ask, but why is this happening? So if the problem is boys of color do not have a healthy start, all your table needs to think about is but why. Write down your response to but why, and then the next thing you'll think about is but why this is occurring. Write that down, and then you can give us a solution thinking about what can be done, and that is it. And we'll take that information and then compile that. Make sense? I see a nod, so I'll take one nod.